5 years ago, East Africa and Southern Africa were neck and neck. Johannesburg bustled as Africa's financial hub. Cape Town and Durban ports handled massive trade flows. Kigali, Addis Ababa, and Dar es Salaam were growing, but slowly, quietly, almost in the shadows. Today, the picture looks very different. East Africa is surging ahead. Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Tanzania are posting 6% or more growth. Industrial parks are springing up, ports are humming, and digital infrastructure is attracting global investors. Meanwhile, Southern Africa, long the continent's powerhouse, is stuck in low gear. South Africa struggles with sluggish growth, unresolved energy crises, and high unemployment. Neighboring economies dependent on Johannesburg's dynamism are also slowing. The result? Africa's economic map is splitting into winners and losers. This isn't about natural resources or geography, it's about choices, strategy, and execution. East Africa figured out how to grow in the 21st century. Southern Africa hasn't yet. This is the story of divergence, risk, and opportunity in modern Africa. 5 years ago, the economic gap between East Africa and Southern Africa was barely noticeable. Johannesburg and Cape Town dominated commerce and finance. Addis Ababa and Kigali were growing, yes, but the pace was steady, modest, almost invisible in continental rankings. Today, that balance has shifted dramatically. East Africa is accelerating at nearly 6% growth, while Southern Africa is stuck around 2.2%, and South Africa itself is barely growing at 0.8%. This divergence isn't random. It's the outcome of different strategies, governance approaches, and investment priorities. East African countries bet on growth, modernization, and regional integration. Southern Africa, meanwhile, relied on legacy advantages. The consequences are tangible. By 2030, East Africa's combined GDP could surpass Southern Africa's for the first time in decades. The shift isn't just about numbers. It's about momentum, opportunity, and where the continent's economic gravity is heading. A young entrepreneur in Kigali now has a chance to scale a tech startup that would have struggled to gain traction in Johannesburg. Factories in Ethiopia are producing goods for regional and international markets, while some South African businesses remain idle, constrained by power shortages and slow bureaucracies. East Africa's growth is visible everywhere. Cranes rising, roads being paved, ports expanding, and investment dollars flowing in from China, the US, and India. Meanwhile, Southern Africa faces stagnation, despite having more developed infrastructure and larger historical economic clout. The story here is simple but profound. Strategy, risk-taking, and execution are redefining Africa's economic hierarchy. East Africa's growth engine is a combination of vision, investment, and youthful dynamism. Ethiopia has transformed itself from famine-stricken and import-dependent to a manufacturing hub attracting billions in investment. Industrial parks sprout across the country, producing textiles, electronics, and consumer goods for regional export. The political situation isn't perfect, but controlled stability allows investors to plan and execute. Rwanda has positioned itself as a tech and business hub, with digital infrastructure investments, government support for startups, and predictable regulations. Kigali is becoming the Silicon Valley of East Africa. Tech companies relocating from South Africa are now choosing Rwanda as a launchpad for regional operations. Tanzania leverages its natural resources and geographic advantage, gas discoveries, mining expansions, and strategically developed ports along the Indian Ocean have made Dar es Salaam a logistics hub. These infrastructure projects attract multinational companies seeking reliable trade routes and growth markets. Regional integration is another key driver. The East African Community, EAC, is facilitating trade across borders, harmonizing regulations, and creating a regional market that encourages both competition and collaboration. Companies can now produce in Ethiopia, source labor in Rwanda, and export via Tanzania with unprecedented ease. The demographic factor amplifies growth. East Africa has the youngest population on the continent, with a labor force expanding rapidly and a consumer market hungry for products, services, and digital solutions. Investment in education and vocational training ensures that the workforce can support industrial and technological ambitions. Financially, the results are clear. East Africa's combined GDP is approaching $500 billion, with $30 billion added annually. Foreign direct investment is surging. Infrastructure, tech, and manufacturing are creating a virtuous cycle. More investment, more jobs, more growth, more investment. East Africa's strategy is deliberate. coordinated, and risk-embracing, and it's paying off Southern Africa's struggle. Southern Africa, in contrast, is slowing, despite its historical advantages. South Africa, the largest economy, grows at a mere 0.8%. Rolling blackouts and lingering energy issues constrain factories and mines. Unemployment remains staggering, particularly among youth, and business confidence is low. Neighboring Southern African countries, heavily reliant on South Africa for trade, financial services, and investment, are also impacted. Economies such as Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe are slowing because the regional engine is faltering. Mining-dependent sectors remain vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations. Roads, ports, and power grids built decades ago are aging without sufficient investment for modernization. Regulatory bottlenecks and bureaucratic delays make launching new businesses or scaling operations painfully slow. Governance challenges further weigh on progress. Political gridlock in South Africa, instability in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and inconsistent policy implementation reduce investor confidence. Democracy, while essential for participation and rights, has slowed decisive economic action compared to East Africa's more centralized approaches. The contrast is stark. Southern Africa has more resources, larger cities, and more developed historical infrastructure, but it's growing slower. Meanwhile, East Africa, once perceived as behind, is sprinting ahead. The divergence is not about capability. It's about strategy, execution, and willingness to take calculated risks for the future. The strategy difference. The core difference between East and Southern Africa lies in strategy. East Africa chose growth over cautious maintenance. Governments in Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania invested in infrastructure, technology, and manufacturing with a willingness to disrupt existing systems. Growth initiatives exist, but bureaucratic processes, regulatory hurdles, and fragmented regional cooperation slow progress. The Southern African Development Community, SADC, framework exists, but member states often compete instead of collaborating. East Africa's investments are forward-looking. Tech hubs, industrial parks, port expansions, and education systems geared toward 21st century industries. Southern Africa relies heavily on legacy advantages, mining, finance, and agriculture, sectors that once powered the economy but now face stagnation. Real-world examples highlight the contrast. Rwanda's investment in digital infrastructure attracts regional startups. Ethiopia's industrial parks are luring manufacturing operations away from South Africa. Tanzania's ports are becoming key logistics hubs. Southern Africa, by contrast, struggles to keep pace with these strategic bets. The result: East Africa's economies are integrated, efficient, and growing rapidly. Southern Africa is stable but stagnant. The lesson is clear: growth beats maintenance. Risk, execution, and forward-looking strategy determine economic leadership, not past advantages or natural resources. Investment governance and the long-term implications. Investment patterns reinforce the divergence. East Africa is attracting more foreign direct investment than Southern Africa for the first time in decades. Chinese infrastructure projects, U.S. tech funding, and development finance from international institutions flow disproportionately to Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Tanzania. Private equity and emerging market funds increasingly favor East Africa's momentum. FDI in the region has grown 40% year over year, while Southern Africa remains flat or declining. Governance is key. Predictable, decisive governments in East Africa enable rapid execution of projects. A Chinese company can build a factory in Rwanda in 18 months. The same in South Africa can take 3 years with 10 regulatory hurdles. By 2030, East Africa's combined GDP could surpass Southern Africa's. Economic gravity is shifting from Johannesburg to Addis Ababa. Kigali and Dar es Salaam migration trends already reflect this shift, with young professionals moving eastward in search of opportunity. Southern Africa still has potential. If South Africa stabilizes energy, improves governance, and addresses unemployment, the region could reignite growth. But the window is closing. East Africa's virtuous cycle, investment, jobs, growth, is accelerating, while Southern Africa risks irrelevance if caution continues to dominate strategy. The story isn't about one region failing, it's about adaptation in the 21st century economy. East Africa understood that growth requires risk, speed, and integration, Southern Africa is learning that the cost of caution can be falling behind. The next decade will determine which regions define Africa's economic future. So, what can you do? First, share this video. Most people have no idea how fast Africa's economic power map is changing. Second, drop a comment. Do you think South Africa can still catch up? Or has East Africa already pulled too far ahead? And third, subscribe, because next week we're diving deep into South Africa's fight to regain its lost economic crown.